everyone. I can see that we've already got a number of people that have started watching, so thank you for joining us. I'm just going to, before I get started, we'll just wait a little bit of time before I get going to allow a few more people to join before we get stuck into discussing everything MS research related. But if you are watching now, if you're one of the people that has already logged on, please say hi. Just type in the comment section. If you haven't done that before, type in the comment section, say hi, let me know who's watching so that we can get this conversation going. It's great to know who's on board and who's watching and who's joining in the conversation. Obviously, there's no pressure. You're more than welcome just to sit there and watch. But if you are here and do want to participate in the conversation, it'd be great if you could just start by saying hi, give the post a like, all of those likes and comments, let anyone in your network who might also be interested in watching see that the broadcast has started, and then they can come and watch as well if they're interested. So we will be getting started in about 30 seconds to a minute more. We'll get it going. Hi, Tony. Great to have you on board. As always, thank you for joining in. Fantastic to have you here. Hi, Myra, welcome. Thank you for participating. Maybe new, is this your first Facebook Live? I don't recall having seen your name before on any of our conversations. If it is your first one, fantastic, it's great to have you here. If it's not, welcome back. Hopefully you enjoy it. Hi, Bernadette. Welcome from Tasmania. Well, Bernadette from Tasmania, welcome here in Melbourne. But welcome. Thank you for joining in. Again, not sure that I've seen you on one of these before, so if it is your first one, welcome and thank you for joining in. If it's not, welcome back. Castle, welcome back. You certainly have participated before. Thank you for coming back and joining us for another one of these. We'll be getting started in a second. As I said, feel free to, if you like the post, all of these likes and comments help let everyone else know that we're broadcasting. But we have some really good viewer numbers, so we can get started as well. Remember that at some point tonight, I'm going to be making a special announcement. I'm actually going to do that at the start, just in case anyone's tuned. Strategically, I should leave that until the end, just in case you're all watching just to hear that announcement. But I'm going to do it at the start, so that if you are just tuning in for that, you can watch, see the special announcement, then you can log off if you want. But hopefully you stay around, because we have some exciting MS research developments that I want to talk about. There's been 3 or 4 different studies that I'm going to talk about, but as always, we're happy to make the conversation whatever you're interested in. So as we go through, if you do have questions, all you have to do, type them in the comments box, and we'll make sure that we respond to all of them. So I think I've been talking enough. We've got a number of people here watching, so let's get started with it. But keep commenting if you are just joining in. Say hi, drop us questions, all of those things. So for people who might be here for the first time, Mara, Bernadette, people watching who we haven't heard from yet, I guess I should start just by introducing myself, just in case you don't know who I am, even though I put my face over MStranslate a lot of the time. My name's Brett Drummond. I'm one of the co-founders of MStranslate, along with my brother Eric. And my background is as a multiple sclerosis researcher. Done that for many years, but now what I focus on mainly is MStranslate and taking all of the research that's going on into MS and communicating it to you guys, the MS community, in a way that's easy to understand and easy for you to access, which we think is really important, and hopefully you guys do as well. And so the whole point of events like tonight is that I come on so that I can interact directly with our community answer questions, and have conversations, because that's what we really enjoy. For me, I really enjoy these events and the opportunity to talk and chat about everything that's going on in multiple sclerosis research. So that's the sort of brief introduction as to who I am. Obviously, if you have any questions about me or MStranslate, you can ask those as well. But let's start by making that special announcement that I've promised. And so hi Honey, welcome. Thank you for joining us again. The exciting announcement, and hopefully this is as exciting for you guys as it is for us, is that for the second year in a row, MStranslate will be attending the ECTRIMS Conference, which this year will be held in September in Stockholm. Hi Janine, welcome, thank you for joining us. So last year I went to Berlin and provided a first-hand account of everything that was being discussed. So this is the biggest MS research conference in the world. There's roughly around 9,000 people that attend, researchers and clinicians from around the world. And as I've said a number of times, it's really important to actually be there in person so that I can ensure that the information that we provide to you is, one, as current as it can be. So this is where breaking news is released. So we're giving you the most up-to-date news that we can, but also that it's as accurate as possible, because obviously if I'm in the room and listening to these talks, it means that what I'm telling you is exactly what I've heard. And as we've discussed many times before, we know that there can be issues that develop when we rely on second-hand information to do this. So having the opportunity to be able to report it directly means that not only are you getting the most up-to-date information, but also the most accurate information. So that's really exciting. As well as that, we're also going to hopefully be conducting some more interviews, just like we did last time on the trip, where we brought you an interview with Helen Tremlett from the University of British Columbia, talking about her fantastic research looking at the gut microbiome, and the interview that we did with Roland Martin from Switzerland, the University of Zurich, where he talked about his research where they discovered the role of B cells in multiple sclerosis, which was one of the huge MS research findings from last year. We do have a few other interviews that we did record last year as well that we're still hoping to release. We're just wanting to get sign off from the researchers involved that they're happy for us to publish them. So, you know, again, we're hoping to release those shortly. But this is the exciting thing for us about being able to be there in person, is that we can provide you access that otherwise isn't possible. So it's really exciting for me to get to travel and again be there in person for this conference. Hopefully, as I said, it's exciting for you guys to be able to get that sort of access. And we may even look, you know, I would love to either at the conference itself or just after the conference finishes, do one of these Facebook Live videos again, so that we can really have the conversations about what I'm hearing at the conference. So depending on time zones and how we can work that out, it may be possible that during the conference we might do one of these videos as well. In advance of traveling there, so as I said, it's in September. The full program is now available through the ECTRIMS website, and we'll do a post on this in the coming weeks, but you can go onto the ECTRIMS website and see all of the different talks that are being presented, all of the posters that are being presented, and let us know if there are topics that you're particularly interested in that are going to be presented at the conference. Send me an email, comment on Facebook, and we will make a point of trying to get access to those researchers to talk to you directly, either via an interview or a written article, or even potentially a Facebook Live if we manage to do that. Or we'll make sure that we attend those talks and we provide a update on the research that they're discussing. It's not possible for me to attend every talk. Unfortunately, they often have sort of 6 to 8 sessions going on at the one time. So I have to make decisions about what room we're sitting in and what talks we're listening to. So if you've got things that you're particularly interested in, that will help us make those decisions. Hi Nadine, welcome. Thank you for your question. Do you find most researchers are happy to be interviewed, or are they too busy networking or concerned about sharing results that aren't published? Yeah, it's a really good question. Certainly there's a mix. Some people are really interested in being interviewed and engaging with the public about their research. A lot of times people aren't necessarily concerned about sharing results that aren't published, because we do make a point of stressing to them in terms of what we can and can't talk about. And I think my research background helps in those conversations as well, because they know that I understand the delicacies of talking about results that aren't published yet. So in those situations, they'd be more talking about the background to their research and the sort of areas that they're interested in, rather than maybe preliminary results or published results from earlier studies. But some people, I guess, yes, it is an incredibly busy conference. You know, as I said, there's sort of 9,000 to 10,000 people at this conference. Everything's packed into 3 days. People are coming from all over the globe. So it is a chance for researchers to meet and discuss collaborations, which is hugely important as well, and which is fantastic to see happening at these meetings. So sometimes there just isn't time. And some people aren't, I guess, necessarily hugely comfortable about standing in front of a camera and talking. I apparently love the sound of my own voice, which is why I do it all the time. But yeah, it is a real mix, and so that's why, you know, we can only do our best in terms of if there's someone that people are interested in hearing from, we can certainly make the approach. You know, we send out lots and lots of emails to people who will be attending, and we just hope to hear back from as many as we can and get people accepting it from as many as we can. But there's no harm in asking. That's sort of the lesson that we've learned after all these years. If you don't ask, then you're definitely not going to get the interview. If you do, they may say yes. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question a little bit. But it is also, it's an important part of being at these conferences, of understanding what you can and can't talk about, especially when you're sitting in the sessions. And I think that's important to stress to the researchers as well, because while there is a bit of an unwritten rule in terms of if you're showing unpublished data, people aren't putting that online anywhere. Certainly you do see people at these conferences taking photos of slides when they're told that they shouldn't be, and posting them online. So it's, you know, I think it is a lot about trust and building trust. And I think that having been doing this for 6 years now, MStranslate has built up quite a bit of trust within the researcher community as well. People respect our approach and know that if they agree to do something through MStranslate, that we'll take a very respectful way of doing it, that mirrors up with their goals. And also we let them review the content before it gets published online, which is why some of the content that we took last year, we still haven't published, because we're still waiting to hear back to get approval for that. But while it's, you know, we would love to be able to publish things straight away, and some of the content that we haven't shared yet is really fantastic content, you know, we're very mindful about keeping that reputation within the research community as well. So, you know, it's just, for us, that's a really important thing. So as we keep going, so if anyone else has any questions about ECTRIMS, is anyone else excited about the fact that you'll be getting live coverage from ECTRIMS from MStranslate? Hopefully some direct interaction with some of the biggest researchers from around the world, but certainly coverage, first-hand coverage from us. Anyway, if anyone has any questions about that, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'll get started on talking about some of the other research projects that have been published in the past week or two that I want to focus on. But we have some really good viewing numbers at the moment. So for everyone that's here, and if they've just joined, welcome. Let me know who you are. Let me know if you're watching, or who you are that's watching. I've just made our special announcement that I promised during this broadcast, which is that I will be attending the ECTRIMS Conference again this year, which will be held in Stockholm, which means that MStranslate will be able to provide some first-hand information about the latest and greatest in MS research. So it's exciting for us, and we hope that that's exciting for you. It's exciting for Janine, which is great to hear. So if you have any comments or questions on that, if you're wondering who I am, if you're wondering anything about MStranslate, feel free to ask those questions now. Hi Jenny, welcome. Hope Brisbane's slightly warmer than Melbourne is at the moment. Welcome again. I have a feeling this might be your first Facebook Live video, or certainly the first that I've noticed a comment in. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but if it is your first, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Fantastic to have you on board. So I'll just give just a couple of minutes for anyone to ask any questions that they may have about that. It is your first. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Jenny. It's great to have you on board. As I said, if you've got any questions, all you have to do is type them there, and I'll answer all the questions that come through across the night. So, hi Debbie, welcome. Welcome from Melbourne. You know what I'm talking about in terms of how cold it is. Daughter has a mesh, she's only 19. Sorry to hear that. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you find MStranslate a useful resource. Feel free to ask any questions that you have tonight. We'll be happy to answer them. Hi Fran, welcome. Welcome back. I know Fran definitely has participated in a number of these before. So Bernadette, is the conference heavily sponsored by drug companies? Difficult question to answer in terms of if it's how much sponsorship the conference gets from drug companies. There is certainly a presence at the conference by drug companies. MStranslate will not be getting sponsored by drug companies to attend. That's, I guess, an important comment to make. But yeah, they certainly do attend, and they play a role there in terms of updating researchers in terms of the latest data that they have in terms of things like drug safety or drug effectiveness, and there will be a number of talks that will update people in terms of that information. In terms of whether they sponsor the conference itself, that they will pay, they pay money to be there and to have a presence there and to have their stands there. So, they're paying their way to be there. Researchers will pay registration fees to attend. So, yeah, I think that answers your question a little bit. There is certainly a pharmaceutical company presence at the conference. A lot to do with updating people in terms of what's going on with their MS treatments. Not as cold as New Zealand, I bet. No, that's probably true, Mara. I hope you're staying warm. Christine, excellent. Looking forward to hearing the latest information on Ocrevus side effects. Yeah, that is something that I'm hoping that we hear a little bit. Now, I'm still going through the program. As I said, it is a jam-packed program. But I'm hoping that we will, now that Ocrevus has been out for a little bit longer, I'm hoping that we're starting to get a bit more long-term safety data and real-world observational safety data that we might get updated on at the conference. And I know that there's a number of people in our community that are interested in that, so I'll certainly provide any updates on that that we see. Lucy, hello, I'm in Canberra. I've had MS for 8 years and I'm 38. Welcome again, Lucy. First time viewer, potentially, first time to one of these Facebook Live videos. If so, welcome. Paul, some further feedback on Mavenclad. Yeah, again, I'll be interested to see what's discussed on that. Again, very new in terms of it being out, but we may get some updates in terms of data on that. Also in terms of its use for people with active secondary progressive MS. It's been approved for that in the US. Whether there's some early data on that would be really interesting to see. And I know we've talked about it briefly before when I attended the Macedon Rangers group to talk, but it will be really interesting to see that. So those are the sorts of things that we're going to be seeing. First time, fantastic, Lucy, welcome. So great to have you on board. As I said, if you've got any questions about me or MStranslate or MS research in general, feel free to type them and I will answer them as we go through the night. It's fantastic to have so many people on board, both people who have been with us for a while and new people. It's fantastic. We've got some really great viewing numbers at the moment, so fantastic to have so many people on board joining us. So feel free to ask as many questions as you want. For those who are just joining us or who have maybe participated in these before, the first one of these we did a while back now, and I've told this story before. I thought maybe I would be on for about half an hour, probably just talking to myself and just providing some updates. It ended up with the amount of questions that we had that I was online for about 3 hours. I was quite tired by the end of it. I'm not sure that we'll go for 3 hours tonight, but I will stay on as long as the questions keep coming through, so don't be shy. This is a really safe space to ask any questions that you might have. This is what I really enjoy, this part of what I do. It's great to be able to have an interaction and have a conversation. So please feel free, if you're new, if you've been here before, send through any questions that you have. Let's talk about them, because that's what the point of tonight is. So let's get on to talk about the first MS research study that I want to talk about tonight. And as I said, as I'm talking about any of these things, feel free to drop any questions about this or any other things we've talked about previously, and I will answer them. So one of the first things I want to talk about tonight is a study that we actually featured on our Facebook page, a short little interview with the researcher that was done on ABC Radio a while back from the Menzies Institute in Tasmania, looking at the use of using magnetic stimulation to promote myelin repair. Now, if you've watched these videos before or heard me talk on MStranslate before, you'll know that we often say that Lucy, perfect timing. That's what I'm about to talk about, and this is exactly why I'm going to talk about it. That I've talked on MStranslate before about myelin repair being the next big step in terms of the treatment of MS. That currently the medications, the treatments that we have available are really good in terms of being able to stop new damage from occurring. Obviously, people still respond differently to different medications, but you know, especially some of the newer therapies are quite good and quite powerful at being able to protect against new damage. But none of those really do anything in terms of repairing existing damage, and obviously repairing existing damage would potentially help actually improve symptoms. So not just slow the disease course, but actually be able to reverse it slightly. And this is, I mean, this is hugely important for improving quality of life and to really get a more complete management of MS. Now, this was, so we published this a while ago. There was an article that just went up on the MS Research Australia page this afternoon about it. The article is quite good. What you may have seen, and possibly Lucy, this is how you came to find the MStranslate live broadcast tonight, is that I commented under that post just to say that I will be talking about that research tonight and that we would be doing the Facebook Live, and that it's really exciting research. And hopefully I'm not going to lose my voice 25 minutes into the video. Now, what I commented underneath was that I thought it was really important to stress that what that research has shown at the moment is that this technique has the potential to be able to do it. And I think that definitely came across in the article that was published. I'm not sure that it necessarily came across in the Facebook post itself. So if you have seen that Facebook post, excuse me, if you have seen that Facebook post, go and read the article. But it's important to realize that it's at very early stages. So what's been shown at the moment was really that this technique, if it's used in a certain way in mice cells, can increase the number of cells that we know produce myelin. So that's what's been shown at the moment, that this technique, not in human trials or anything like that, but in a mouse model, in an animal model, that it can be used to promote cells. It seemed to be able to, in some circumstances, promote the cells that produce myelin. So if we extend those results further, we can see that there's potential then to be able to use this in a way to promote those cells, which may help with myelin repair. Now, there's obviously lots that needs to be done along the way in terms of seeing whether or not this will become a potential therapy for people living with MS, in terms of seeing whether or not it works in human studies with human cells, in terms of understanding all of the safety requirements. Now, this similar sort of technique has been used before, not necessarily in people with MS, but in other areas, and safety. So there is some information about safety information to do with it, and whether it can be, how well it can be targeted. So, I think that was just an important point that did definitely come across in the article, not so much in terms of the Facebook post. Well, the Facebook post was fine, but I think it just needed to be cleared up. So that was just the comment on that. So Nadine, in vivo or in vitro. So looking through the study, and we will write a more detailed summary on this study, seeing as it's come up again and there was more information. We have actually talked to the researchers involved at the Menzies, and we're hopeful about maybe being able to do an interview with them in the future. So that's why we hadn't gone into more detail with it yet, but I think because it's come up again, we will write a more detailed summary on this, a written summary to appear on the MStranslate website. But this was done in vivo in terms of what they were looking at. Essentially what this means is, were they looking at the production of those cells in mice, in live mice, or was it taking mice cells, that's the in vivo, taking mice-derived cells and looking at them in culture in a lab, which would be in vitro. So according to the journal article that was published a while back in Glia, they were able to show this so they were able to look at it in terms of, I'm just flicking through the paper here. I just had it, and then I flicked back to find the journal name that it was in. They looked at it in the mouse cortex, and they looked at the fate of these cells in the mice, using both ones that were treated, ones that weren't treated with the magnetic stimulation, and then ones that were treated with different amounts of pulses over different time frames, and looked at what happened to the production of those oligodendrocyte precursor cells, or OPCs, which is the ones that are involved in producing myelin. Diane Moon, will it help atrophy? That's a really good question. So, I mean, the data hasn't. My easiest answer for that, my first answer for that is the data for that wasn't generated as part of this study. As far as I'm aware from when I read through the paper, they didn't look at brain volume at all. They were just looking at these cells that produce myelin. So they haven't looked at that at all. Whether it would potentially protect atrophy, yeah, I don't really know. It's likely, I mean, this is now just me hypothesizing, is that it could be a slightly different mechanism involved in terms of the two things. But it would be certainly interesting to see whether or not it happens. And atrophy is now something that is almost a standard measurement in terms of looking at new therapies, both. So the existing therapies that we have and new ones that are coming out, they're looking more and more at the effect on brain volume. So it's an interesting question. They don't have the data on it yet, is my easiest answer to that. Hasn't magnetic stimulation been used for Parkinson's disease? Yeah, so that's my understanding. Again, certainly not my area of expertise in terms of what's happened in terms of Parkinson's. There have been some small studies, and there have been some small studies of similar sorts of thing in MS that are really small trials where they've looked at using it in different ways and reported things like improvements in fatigue, improvements in spasticity, some memory improvements in memory performance, but they haven't looked at it in terms of myelin repair at all. So, you know, there's still questions there in terms of how well it'll work in terms of what you need to promote myelin repair and whether or not that's going to work in this sort of situation. Can certainly look into a bit more in terms of what exactly they've seen for Parkinson's disease. I'm just doing a quick search now. It's not mentioned in the paper at all. This MS paper that's been published by the group in Tasmania. They haven't looked at it in terms of Parkinson's disease, but yeah, my understanding is that it has been done. But yeah, I don't know any of the specific details about that. Sorry. Hi Hope, welcome. I know you've joined these before, so thank you for joining. Welcome back. Bernadette, thank you so much for having to be part of it, or for being part of it, sorry. Yeah, so once we finish tonight, the whole Facebook Live gets posted to the Facebook page, so you're able to watch it back at any time and catch up on all the things that you haven't seen. So that, I think, really interesting work. As I said, we're hopeful of being able to talk a bit more about it. From the researchers, we're really hoping that the researchers themselves might be able to give us an interview about it, and maybe even a Facebook Live to be able to talk about it in a bit more detail. Really exciting early stuff in a really exciting area. Great that we've got local research looking into it. Menzies as a whole are doing some really fantastic research. So yeah, but early stages in terms of where this goes. And I think it's always important, as we say a lot, always important to sort of keep that context in it when we talk about these things. So that was one of the papers that I wanted to talk about. The next one that I want to talk about, feel free to keep asking questions about that if you want to. But the next one that I want to talk about is something that we haven't mentioned yet on MStranslate. But it's something that I will be writing a article about shortly, but I wanted to discuss it first on here, is mitochondrial dysfunction. Hi, Wendy. No worries. Thank you for joining us for a little while. The recording will appear on the Facebook page as soon as we're done, so you'll be able to watch it and a more convenient time. So mitochondrial dysfunction. So we've talked about this before on MStranslate when we did a feature on MitoQ, which some of you may or may not remember. But to provide the background on this, mitochondria are found in our cells, and essentially they're responsible for producing the energy that we need to function. And what we know is that mitochondria don't work as well in people with MS. And there are studies that have shown this and looked into why it might be the case. And so that's where the rationale for MitoQ comes in, is that, and I'm going to drop the link to all of our interviews that we did about MitoQ previously, so you can watch them back if you want to. But essentially the rationale behind MitoQ is that it's a molecule that can get in beyond where they think the block is in this energy producing process and kick-start it again, so that energy production is more normalized. And so that theoretically will lead to improvements in things like fatigue. More energy you have, the less tired you should be. So I'll drop that link here. If you want to go back and watch any of those videos, certainly can, because it is very interesting. And this MitoQ is actually now doing clinical trials of MitoQ in people with MS in Portland. They're running them at the Oregon Health and Sciences University. So important while we put this up that in terms of MitoQ at the moment, they haven't got clinical trial evidence to show that it's effective in people with MS. There's some anecdotal evidence from people living with MS who have taken it, and we have one of the videos on that page with a member of our community who has used it before as the helicopter comes into land at the hospital. But no clinical trial evidence on it yet. But interestingly, what this recent paper has shown, so this was published just a couple of days ago, is looking at the CSF, or the cerebrospinal fluid, of people with relapsing remitting MS versus people with progressive MS. And looking at their CSF in terms of what it does to mitochondria. So an interesting experiment. And what they found, now this was only in really small groups of people, so this is very preliminary work at the moment. They had 15 people with relapsing remitting MS, 15 people with secondary progressive MS, and 14 people with primary progressive MS. And what they did was essentially look at what the CSF from these people did to mitochondria. And what they found was that the CSF of people with progressive MS actually really affected the mitochondria. And what it did was it changed the shape of the mitochondria in a way that would make them less able to function. So a really interesting study that sort of may indicate that there's something in the CSF that happens at a progressive phase that's not in the relapsing remitting phase that affects these mitochondria more, which may then lead to less energy production because the mitochondria are being even more affected, which may lead to greater levels of fatigue, and maybe that's why we see fatigue worsening throughout the disease as well. But that's, as I said, really preliminary, but really interesting study. What they then went on to show is that they could actually reverse that effect that they saw by putting in other molecules to be able to do it. So, really interesting early study. We'll see where it ends up, but that to me I thought was something, especially because we know about mitochondrial dysfunction. We know that it's there. We know that energy production is a problem, probably linked to fatigue, which is something that people living with MS report as one of their symptoms that has the most impact on their quality of life. Having a greater understanding of what may be causing this and how we could potentially overcome it is interesting. So that was another one. As I said, we'll write an article on that to summarize it, so that you have something you can refer back to about that study. But that's something that I thought was really interesting. One of the big things at last year's ECTRIMS conference, which will be interesting to see if it's a big thing again this year, was that there was a lot more focus on how do we treat symptoms of people living with MS. So for a long time, the research area had been about how do we try and treat the disease. So how do we stop new lesions? How do we suppress the immune system? And that's been fantastic because it's led to all of these treatment developments. But I think last year, for the first time, we saw we saw an understanding of this stuff is fantastic and we need to keep doing it. We need myelin repair, we need all of these things. But we also need to put research into an area that's going to have a more immediate impact for people living with MS. So how do we overcome fatigue? How do we overcome depression? We know that mental health issues are much more common in people living with MS. So how do we treat that more effectively in the MS community? How do we improve spasticity? How do we reduce pain? So more targeted about the symptoms and improving quality of life, as well as then having all of these other things that may be, more treatments about stopping or slowing disease progression. So is that something for everyone that's watching? Is that something you agree with? Do you want to see more research going on into treating symptoms? Fatigue especially, something that I'm sure people would like to see effective treatments for. Janine, fatigue is definitely my biggest problem, most disabling symptom, which is progressing. Really important research. Yeah, and I think that those thoughts, Janine, are widespread throughout the MS community. So that was really pleasing for me that there is an understanding in the research community that this needs to happen as well. And I think that's big yeses all round. And this leads to a couple of other important points. One thing that I say a lot, and if you tune into these, you hear common themes, but I say them a lot because I think that they're important and I want to keep reiterating them. But one of the reasons why research will have gone down this path and had this understanding is because of people living with MS voicing those opinions. You guys have so much power in terms of being able to shape the research direction by telling researchers what's important to you and what things need to be done, what's going to have the biggest impact on your lives. It's important as researchers, and I've said this before as well, we understand MS really well in terms of what's happening in the body, what things are going on, but we don't understand, or most of us don't understand, what it's like to live with MS, and getting those insights is hugely important. And I think the second point, which sometimes gets lost a little bit, is that the researchers care and they do listen. Researchers aren't doing this. There is often a misconception that researchers are doing their work for money or for glory or for fame. Trust me when I say that none of those things are why researchers are doing what they do. Research is frustrating. Research is incredibly long hours. Anyone who stays in research is doing it because they are passionate about what they do. They are good at what they do, and they believe in trying to help people. So, 100% guarantee that having a greater understanding of what's going on is something that is very welcomed by researchers. So they do, that conversation is hugely important. And hopefully that's part of the role that MStranslate plays, is that we can be that bridge between the MS community and the researchers in both directions. Obviously what we do a lot of is taking the research side of it and communicating it to the MS community in terms of a way they can understand, and that's important. But that conversation goes back the other way as well, and we have conversations with researchers where we share with them things that we've heard from you guys and say this is something that we think the MS community is interested in and is important, and they do listen. So that it is really, really important. Christina, also, how do we manage treatment side effects? Yeah, another hugely important question, and I think again, what we're seeing more and more now of is that we have access to lots of observational data, and I've talked about this a lot because we do work here with the Clinical Outcomes Research Unit, led by Associate Professor Thomas Kalinchik, and that's one of their big areas of research, is now that we're collecting all of this data over the long term, we can actually see what the real world side effects are of these treatments, which is often very different to what we see in clinical trials. Phase 3 clinical trials, the participants in those are selected to be the ones that are going to have the best chance of seeing benefit to the treatment. And so often what we, it's very much the gold standard in terms of what we're looking at. But the real world outcomes can be very different, but that's all now all being captured as well. And it's important that those side effects are monitored and reported. And also that, effective solutions and strategies are determined in terms of how do they get, how do you cope with those side effects? Because in terms of making those decisions about what treatment to go on, it's always going to be that balance of, effectiveness of the treatment versus side effects that come with it. And so having better ways of being able to manage it can certainly be part of that conversation. Karen, pain 2 has hardly any avenues for MS patients, and it ties in with fatigue and depression. Yeah, definitely, Karen. Very closely linked, hugely important, and I guess certainly the biggest area in terms of pain management at the moment that's happening in the research field is with medicinal cannabis. And there were a couple of small talks on that at ECTRIMS last year that I attended, showcasing some results from trials that had happened in Europe that did show benefits in terms of pain and spasticity. It will be interesting to see whether or not there's some more results with that get showcased during this year's meeting, because it is certainly an ongoing conversation. In most places around the world, medicinal cannabis is something that's being discussed. Victoria at the moment, it's legal for refractory epilepsy or children with epilepsy. Whether that gets expanded to MS, it will be interesting to see, but pain is certainly something that I think people are looking into. Thanks, Janine. To be honest, I don't do a lot of research myself anymore. I sort of do this is what takes up all of my time, but having been in research for a long time and knowing lots of researchers through our interactions now and my interactions back then, trust me when I say that they are hugely committed and really working to try and find answers. The work that they do and their dedication is amazing. No worries, Kathy. That probably would have been far more interesting than listening to me. If you did miss the exciting announcement, one, you can go back and watch the video once it's recorded, but it was that MStranslate you actually, I think, already know this, that MStranslate will be attending ECTRIMS in person again this year. So that's exciting. We'll be able to provide first-hand information from Stockholm. Janine, pain is a symptom that a lot of doctors can't really understand how pain can be a really disabling symptom. Sometimes I think having invisible symptoms is less desirable. Wish we could try cannabis. Yeah, look, I mean, the conversation of invisible symptoms is certainly one that happens a lot. You know, the theme of World MS Day this year was invisible symptoms. So it causes a lot of problems, both in terms of conversations with healthcare professionals, because it's hard to explain what you're experiencing, and trying to come up with better ways to make that communication is important. Also in terms of just being out in the general community, and we hear lots of stories about misunderstandings that occur because people don't understand what it's like to live with MS. And unfortunately, some people will jump the gun and accuse people, you know, of not really being sick when they don't understand, you know, how disabling things like fatigue can be. That it's not just, you know, you feel a little tired. You know, people have described it to me before as, you know, it feels like waking up where your body is completely full of lead. You know, and trying to improve that understanding is hugely important. As I said, it will be really interesting to see what happens with the cannabis, medicinal cannabis research. I think MS is probably one of the conditions where we have some of the strongest evidence to show that there can be benefits. You know, I think some of the trial results that we've seen are quite convincing. Obviously, they're still looking for a bit more data to be published in that area. It will be, as I said, interesting to see whether or not we get any at the meeting this year. Fran, currently too many health professionals stop at the MS diagnosis and use the DMD to hopefully stop progression until there is a problem and the process starts over and you have MS plus dementia, MS plus liver disease, MS plus Huntington's, lupus. Is it the MS progression? Is it chromosome abnormalities? Is it a side effect of the DMD or something else like environment? Yeah, that's a really difficult question in terms of comorbidities that we see with MS, and in terms of, is that related to the disease? Is it something that's happening alongside the disease? It's really hard to tease out that picture to work out what's going on. I think one thing that's happening, or we're certainly shifting towards now, is trying to make those treatment decisions much more personalised, so that we get people on the treatment that's most likely to benefit them as soon as possible. And we have lots of data now, published earlier in the year, you know, suggesting that certainly these treatments, if you get on a highly effective treatment very early in the disease, they do delay the onset of progressive disease, so that you know, that initial decision-making process is really important. I like to think that certainly that's, if that was the case previously, and obviously I'm not involved in the interactions with health professionals, you know, this is the things that we can help try and improve if this is still a case. I like to think that there's a growing awareness about things like symptom management. As I said, in terms of things that we hear at the conference, that certainly seems to be the case. And in terms of, you know, what sort of lifestyle modifications can people be including alongside using DMDs that can help with these sorts of things as well. So whether it's, you know, dietary modifications, whether it's the use of exercise, whether it's brain training. You know, I've seen things in terms of improving brain health, strategies for that are now, guidelines for that are coming out. You know, certainly important things around it. We've seen a agree, Brett, weighing up the treatment and side effects versus disease is very difficult. Yeah, it is. And that's, you know, one of the things of this observational data now is that we're hoping that they're shifting towards a system where it can be much more personalised, in terms of, you know, they can take an individual situation And instead of trying to work out, what's the best decision based on, what you want to do, they can start to try and make, or what they hope to be able to do in the future, and we're getting closer to it, is start to be able to make better predictions using, the data of tens of thousands of people living with MS around the world, seeing how they've responded to treatments, matching individuals up with the people most like them in terms of age, gender, lesions, all of these different things, going, well, of the 5,000 people who looked the most like you, the people who did the best were the people that started on Tysabri or who started on Gilenya or whatever it is, so that initial decision can be based on a lot more evidence. So it's shifting towards that. It's always still going to be a balance of, how does this fit in with other aspects of your life, like things like family planning, how many side effects you're willing to take on and things like that. Thank you, Diogo, hopefully I pronounced that right. Thank you for joining us again, I think first time on one of these Facebook Live broadcasts. If it is, welcome. If it's not, welcome back. Pain, spasms, and spasticity, yeah, and all of those things, as I said, some of the trials, Angela, again, welcome, Angela. I know you've been on these before, so welcome back. Certainly some of those European trials showed that medicinal cannabis can be helpful with those. We'll see what else comes out. Obviously, Botox is something that's also shown good results in terms of improving spasticity in people with MS. So there are things that are coming out for that area. But as I said, we'll have more information come September when we're at ECTRIMS. We'll certainly be reporting that as much as we can on that from the conference. So the next piece of research that I wanted to talk about, as I pull it up on my screen, I scroll through all of the different ones that I have, was one that we published a link to an article about this slightly earlier in the week, is looking at gut microbiome, and we know that the gut microbiome is something that people in our community find really interesting, and looking how potentially a healthy gut microbiome can protect against infections of the central nervous system. So specifically, what this one looked at was the link to gut microbiomes. This was done by a group at the University of Utah, who were featured before with a group looking at endogenous retroviruses. This was a different group from the University of Utah. And essentially looking at their gut microbiomes and how well they were protected against getting a hepatitis virus. And they were able to show that differences in the gut microbiome did impact on their protection from these infections. So they took mice with a healthy microbiome and then others with a non-healthy microbiome, essentially ones where they disrupted it. One way of doing that was giving them antibiotics, which got rid of a lot of the gut bacteria. And they showed that the ones that had that changed microbiome had a weaker response to the hepatitis virus, and that meant that they were more susceptible to getting neurological outcomes. So, paralysis, neurodegeneration. So again, this was mouse studies really early on, but just another piece of evidence that we keep getting, these pieces of evidence that show how the gut microbiome may be involved in it. It's all about piecing together these piecing together the jigsaw puzzle. So You know, we know that there are differences in the gut microbiome. How is that involved? Is it something that's happening afterwards? Is it something that's happening in the initiation? We think that there may be a role for infections. Is this a reason why two people can get infected with the same virus, but one will develop MS and the other, you know, won't? Is it because of getting the infection isn't enough? It's how susceptible you are to it based on your gut microbiome at the time. You know, these are all just, I'm just raising questions at the moment, but, you know, we're starting to see more and more, and while each of these things in isolation is just another small piece, it's starting to, you know, the more and more of these small pieces that we get, the more we can start to work out how they fit together. And, you know, it's interesting because we're seeing the same things start to come up. It's, you know, gut microbiome, more and more pieces of evidence about how that's involved, infections, more and more. So, you know, getting there. So again, it's an interesting one. We put a link up the other day. If you're interested in hearing more about that study, let me know. We can write a summary for it at the MStranslate website as well. Happy to do that. Kathy, I want to see how the results of the STEPMAT trial, a good sample and have some pretty good results. Yeah, interested in seeing that. You may remember that we did a little promotion for that in terms of the recruitment. I don't know the exact time frame in terms of the results getting published for that, but hopefully when they do, again, we're able to get some of the researchers behind that onto MStranslate to provide an update on those results, because it will be interesting to see what they show. Lucy, do you think trauma may play a role in developing MS? Physical trauma, there's certainly been some studies that have investigated that have shown or looked at whether things like concussions may be involved in MS. I wouldn't say that we're at a point where we have a definitive answer on that. I think some of the studies have looked interesting, but certainly not conclusive. You know, whether or not trauma is a way that sets off some process that leads to MS. You know, disrupting the blood-brain barrier, for example. You know, who knows? It could be. I think what we're potentially seeing is that there could be many different ways of getting to MS. And in some people, you know, the trauma may start something that in other people get started from something else, be an infection or things like that starts to cause the trauma. You know, is it that we just need something to cause some inflammation to start with? And that inflammation, when all of these other perfect storm components are present, leads to MS. You know, in some people that initial insult might be trauma, in others it's an infection. You know, who knows? But certainly people are looking into it. Okay, so hopefully, you know, but towards the end of this year or early next year, we start to get some results from the STEPMAT trial. It'll be good. Janine, childhood trauma has been shown to lead to PTS illness. Now, in terms of, are we talking, just to be clear, are we talking about physical trauma, so, you know, something like a concussion, or traumatic situations that may induce stress or things like that? So I'm trying to recall the study that I read in terms of that latter option. It's not springing to mind, but I'm sure I've read something about that as well, looking into whether or not that's linked. So that's another one. So again, I found that pretty interesting. And the last one that's just also come out, hasn't appeared in a journal yet, but it's on a preprint server, looking at aggressive MS and whether or not we can identify people who are more at risk of having aggressive MS, because obviously, again, this leads back to treatment decisions. If we can identify people who are likely to progress quickly, and that's really what we're talking about in terms of aggressive MS, can we target those individuals to get them onto the strongest therapies quickly before they go down that path? And so this paper's looked at a large amount of clinical data that's available, and taken people with aggressive MS and people without aggressive MS, and seen what differences exist between them when we do sophisticated statistics on it. What can we tease out that seems to be the factors that are critical to having this aggressive MS? And this has been done, again, this was done here from the Clinical Outcomes Research Unit. Research fellow there, Dr. Charles Malpass, has done that work. And they've found that things like the age of onset is important for that. Also the types of lesions that are present, and also how quickly do they get over an EDSS of 3. So if that happens in the first year, that seems to be really important. So older than 35, when symptoms start, progress to EDSS of greater than 3 within the first year of the disease, and presence of certain brain signs, lesions in certain areas of the brains, seems to be the 3 factors that are most linked to having aggressive MS. So, the importance of this is that we may be able to identify people then. If we find someone who comes in, they're older than 35 when the symptoms started, progress quickly to over EDSS of 3 within that first year, and they have these signs, that may be a alarm bell, essentially, or a warning sign that this person may be a candidate for aggressive MS, and so we need to treat that accordingly. Janine, childhood trauma to PTSD. Yeah, okay. Mean that it leads to inflammation. Interesting, and I think that there are some really important links between different conditions that can be made. There are conferences where it's really important that all these people come together so that we can hear about what's happening in things like PTSD, kind of whether there's commonalities there that may be applied to MS. Laurie, welcome, Laurie. Again, first time potentially on one of our Facebook Live broadcasts. If it is, welcome. GPs need to be educated so diagnosis doesn't take so long. Yeah, certainly, and I would extend that as well to say that we need greater awareness in the public about what multiple sclerosis is, for 2 reasons. One, to overcome that thing that we were talking about earlier in terms of not having misconceptions in the public about multiple sclerosis, and understanding of the invisible symptoms that people with multiple sclerosis face, but also so that people have an understanding of, what those really early symptoms may be, and the process to get those checked out. I think that anything that can improve how members of the public understand multiple sclerosis, hugely important. Christine, age of onset, so younger age onset, poorer outcomes. In terms of this study, in terms of just looking at, so this study was purely looking at people who, what were the risk factors for having aggressive MS, so one that progressed really quickly. It was actually older onset that were more likely to have aggressive, so an age of greater than 35 was one of the factors that seemed to be linked to that cohort that they looked at. What about clinically isolated syndrome? This could be years and years prior to a diagnosis. Yeah, so this looked at symptom onset, so not disease diagnosis. What I think would be really interesting, because this is coming up quite a bit in recent papers. We also had this one that we talked about with the Swedish study recently, looking at cognitive outcomes, is that they seem to be using symptom onset rather than age of diagnosis more and more, which I think is important because of what we've talked about in terms of this understanding that people often have got symptoms for quite a while before being diagnosed. But it would be really interesting to get one of the researchers to come on and talk to us about, how do they determine that? Now, I assume it's largely part of the getting the medical history and talking to the person after they're diagnosed with, when were your first symptoms of this? And that gets recorded. But obviously there's always going to be a little bit of difficulty in accuracy with that. But it would be really interesting. I think it would be really interesting to get an understanding of how that's being done in research. Because as we say, it is really important. So that was the last study that's come out. So all of these studies that we've talked about tonight are really recent. One prior to being published at the moment, or in the submission process. Others that have been published within the past couple of weeks. So really cutting edge sort of stuff. Very different. One looking at how do we characterize people with most aggressive forms so that we can better treat them. One looking at myelin repair, and then a couple of really basic science ones looking at, how does the gut microbiome affect protection from viruses, neurological viruses, versus ones that look at energy production and what might be happening to, affect the mitochondria or affect energy production in the body of people with progressive MS. So a really wide range of different studies, but all, I think, really interesting. So those are the main ones that I wanted to talk about tonight. Happy to answer now any general questions that people have. If you have any questions about any of the studies that I've just talked about, if you have any questions about ECTRIMS, which I announced earlier, MStranslate will be attending this year. So this is the biggest MS research conference in the world. It will be happening in September in Stockholm. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask. If you have any questions about any other MS research, or if you have any questions about me or MStranslate that you want to ask, now's the time to ask them. We'll keep going for a little bit longer if there are questions. Otherwise, we'll let people enjoy their evening soon. It's probably getting quite late for a lot of people, but happy to take a few more questions before we finish up. Yeah, completely agree, Kathy. I think it's good that that's now being included rather than just age of diagnosis, because there was a study, I think it was from University of British Columbia, that thought the average age between when symptoms started and diagnosis is probably about 5 years. So quite a long time period where things might be going on that aren't being picked up, which obviously has an impact in terms of research, because what's happening in that window that we're not seeing, but it's important that that's being taken into account. Kathy, mostly in terms of questions about me, let's keep them in terms of my role at MStranslate. But no, not sleeping on mum's couch, thankfully. This is Kathy's running, for people who don't know, this is Kathy's running joke about the lack of funding that MStranslate has. So the majority of the work that we do in MStranslate is unfunded. Do it out of thinking that it's important and we believe in what we do, always looking for funding. But things are going well. Lucy, do any sufferers also attend the conference? Good question. So the conference is definitely geared towards researchers and clinicians in terms of the talks that are given. The talks that are given are quite scientific. That's the audience that they're aiming at. So in terms of, whether people attended, whether they would necessarily, without the science background, get a lot out of the talks. There is some that attend, certainly Shift MS has a few people there, mostly promoting Shift MS and the work that they do, and you'll have seen that we put a post up about them recently. I do have some thoughts about having people living with MS attend the conference as well, and whether that would be beneficial and how we might be able to do that. It would be fantastic to be able to have some there to report back and to do some of the interviews with researchers that MStranslate could help be involved with. It's certainly something that I see value in. I would like there to be a version of ECTRIMS that is aimed at the MS community, where we get big name researchers from around the world to update the MS community on their research. So where people can either come in or it's broadcast online and hear about the research in a way that they can understand. I think that would be great. Whether or not there is a way of getting it to happen with the conferences that are going on at the moment, whether there's value in that, I'm having thoughts on it. It's tough to say too much because with it only being a couple of months away, some of the ideas that I'm having, I don't know that we'd be able to get them done in time. I'm interested in doing it. But yeah, so yes, some people do. The conference is definitely not aimed at it. Is there potential for it? Yes, I think so. We'll keep you updated in terms of how my thoughts on that proceed. When will blood tests to confirm type of MS likely be available in Australia? So this is, I'm going to find, see if I can find this article. So this was an article, journal article from early in 2017 that looked at that, and I know Gilles Chilemaine, who is one of the lead researchers on this study, is a regular follower of MStranslate. I tried to meet up with him recently in Sydney, and unfortunately we weren't able to make it work at that time, but I'm hopeful to get an update on their work soon. So I'll post the link to this. Just posted the link to the article about that blood test and MS type. I think it's a while off. So you've seen my summary there that I thought there were still a number of questions that still needed to be answered. And Gilles agreed with me on these and thought that my analysis of the paper was very good. Obviously, seeing as since that time, he's been quite a big supporter of MStranslate. So in terms of how many answers they've gotten to those questions and how close that is to being done, I'm not sure yet. I'm trying to think if I've seen anything from anywhere else in the world around this. At the moment, I'd have to search the literature again to see if there's anything more recent from anyone else. But yeah, it will be good to get an update on that, certainly, Angela. Interested to see how it's developed. Karen, is there more advancement on myelin repair, and have you heard of any human trials happening soon? So there are human trials happening. So the one that we're most aware of that we've posted on before is with the Tisch MS Research Center in New York, who are looking at the use of mesenchymal stem cells and these mesenchymal stem cells are thought to promote myelin repair. That's what they will do. So very different to the hematopoietic stem cells, which everyone has probably heard of before in terms of the HSCT treatment. This is very different, completely different types of stem cells that will turn into different cells in the body, and these ones are to help repair myelin. They're recruiting currently for a phase 2 trial, so they did some phase 1 safety trials. They're recruiting for a phase 2 trial at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see what's going on with them. We've done interviews with them before. I can link that interview. Let me find it on the website. I'll link that interview in a second for you to watch back. That was after their phase 1 trial. So that would be interesting to get an update from them in terms of how they're progressing with their phase 2. In terms of other ones, it will be interesting to know what's happening with the anti-lingo trials. So there was a human trial for anti-lingo, which was the Biogen myelin repair compound. The trial failed, but it was pretty much agreed by most people that that was probably to do with the trial design, not necessarily the compound, and that they were going to reboot that trial with a slightly different trial design. It'd be interesting to see what's going on with that. And then Novaron, I guess, is the other one. They're a while off from human trials, but I'm hopeful that I'm going to be able to catch up with Travis in Stockholm, and that if we do that, he will certainly be providing some interviews for you guys, for the MStranslate community. So we're in those discussions at the moment to hear how their myelin repair research is going. So, you know, lots of different research in the myelin repair area going on around the world. Some are in human trials, others are in the process of getting to that stage. But certainly, you know, anything that we hear about that at ECTRIMS, we will certainly be responding, reporting on. Yeah, so Travis is in San Diego working on that at the moment. As I said, he'll hopefully be in Stockholm. I'm fingers crossed that he will be able to get there, and then we'll be able to do a catch up with him while we're there so that he can update us. Sorry, just scrolling back now. Branko, the diagnosis time you quoted aligns to my situation. Got my first symptoms in 2008, took until 2013, and 3 relapses to understand it was MS. Yeah. So this understanding is now becoming more and more that there is this time, certainly before MS, that you know, we're interested in seeing what actually happens now. I have an interesting theory about this, but it is very much my own thoughts, and I think it probably would take a bit longer. I shared it last time I talked to the Heidelberg group in person. They got to hear a couple of my wacky theories, and I have a wacky theory that I've been thinking about when I've been lying awake at night in terms of what this, what the fact that we know that there's this window before people get diagnosed might mean in terms of the different types of MS. But Kathy knows about it. Kathy can tell me whether or not I should go into that crazy theory. It's my puppy theory, Kathy, if you remember my puppy theory from when I talked about it last time. It may be the topic of a different one, but we'll see. I'll see what she says. Lucy, I was thinking in the context of researchers talking directly to those in the MS community. Yeah, look, it doesn't happen at ECTRIMS in terms of the actual talks that are given there. We're hoping that will happen through MStranslate in terms of interviews that we do. But I am hugely passionate about the idea of running a conference solely devoted to that. We're thinking about how we could do it. So, you know, we're always coming up with ideas as to the more and more things that we can do to help the MS community. So, you know, that's only one of the things that we're thinking about. Fran, my daughter was 22 when she was diagnosed with MS. It had been active for years prior, but symptom-free. After her LP and MRI, she had 4 relapses every time she stopped taking steroids over 5 months. Been on the strongest available DMD in New Zealand for a year, which has stopped the relapses, active lesions, which has developed new medical issues, which may have contributed to switching on her MS, but we may have to stop the DMD and have nothing to replace it with in New Zealand. Okay, well, so firstly, you know, great that there was a solution. Obviously hard to hear that maybe that's going to need to be changed in the near future. Certainly the New Zealand therapy situation is changing slightly based on some data that came out of Australia. So if you want to email me, Fran, I can give you some extra information from a research perspective on this sort of stuff. Obviously, as I've said many times before, I'm not a clinician, I'm not a healthcare professional at all, so I can't give any sort of medical advice. But if I know a little bit more about the situation, I may be able to tell you what's happened with some of the research here that's impacted on some New Zealand stuff that may be of interest. But yeah, I need to know a little bit more. But you know, with all of that personal sort of medical information, and maybe just to chuck it in an email or drop me a personal message on Facebook, private message on Facebook. Thanks, Luke. Thanks for sharing that. Christine, Fran, we have a similar story, diagnosed 2 weeks before the 16th birthday. Octopus are our only choice now, but in a number of new medical diseases that have considerable impact on quality of life. Yeah, so you know, fingers crossed a solution for both of you can be found that helps there. Do you know anything about the EBV MS trial at Liverpool Hospital? Karen. Yeah, so we've done some coverage of the initial results of that study previously, where essentially the process in this trial is, so there's been thoughts for a really long time that Epstein-Barr virus, which is the virus that causes glandular fever, might be involved in the development of MS. And recent data have shown, you know, things like 100% of people with multiple sclerosis in a cohort, 100% of people with multiple sclerosis had been infected with EBV. Earlier numbers from other studies had shown it was around, you know, sort of 95 to 98%. The difficulty has always been that most people get infected with EBV. You can get infected with EBV without developing glandular fever, so most people get infected without knowing it. And in the general population, it's sort of 85 to 90% of people have been infected with that virus at some point. Now, the thing with this virus is that it's never fully cleared from the body, so it's a chronic infection. Now, what this study has been looking at, and this is Professor Michael Pender from the University of Queensland, his theory on this has been what happens if we take T cells, so cells that are in the immune system, out of an individual, take them in, grow them up in the lab, and essentially expose them to the virus. And by exposing them to the virus, you essentially soup up their response to this virus. So you make them really active and really effective at being able to clear it. You make them really motivated to respond against this virus. Then put those T cells back into the individual and they clear the virus, completely clear the virus. Now this started, I think in 2014, he published a paper with a single individual with MS where he did that procedure. T cells went back in, virus was completely cleared, and they showed clinical improvements. Now, anyone who knows me and knows our conversations on MStranslate, if it's only a single person, it's hard to really make any sort of conclusions about that. He's now been looking at doing that in a larger group of people, They've got some results from an early trial, again in a relatively small cohort, that have shown interesting and positive results, and now that's being expanded in a couple of different centres, one of which being Liverpool Hospital. I think there's also a centre, I think, for Brisbane Hospital, and then there's another centre in New South Wales as well, I believe. Again, we've talked to them a little bit about trying to get some information on this study. We're hopeful we may be able to do that, but these are long processes. But that's what that trial is about. Hopefully that helps answer that question. Hopefully that helps answer that question, Karen. Yeah, I agree. I think it's going off on too much of a tangent, Kathy, for me to talk about that. It needs its own little segment. Let's just stick to what we know about the research rather than Brett's wacky theories. Brett's wacky theories at 8:30 at night after having talked for an hour and a half is probably not what anyone needs. So yeah, as I said, we've just been going for, we've just ticked over the hour and a half mark. So we'll probably look to finish up soon, considering it's quite late in the evening for a lot of people, especially our New Zealand colleagues. Definitely very late there. But if there's any, I can still see that we've got a lot of people watching. The engagement tonight has been fantastic, guys. And I guess let me take this opportunity. I did it earlier in the week on a video. Putting my face in a video on MStranslate twice in a week seems a bit excessive, but there you go, I went and did it. But let me take this opportunity again to thank everyone. So we officially went over 2,000 likes on Facebook this week, which is, you know, a fantastic achievement for us. We're really proud to have gotten to that point. Really proud to have been doing this now for 6 years. Which is crazy. But, you know, it's a real opportunity for us to thank everyone in our community. Because as I said in that video, and I'll say again, you guys are what makes MStranslate special. You're the reason why we do what we do, and it's, you know, I think what is very different about MStranslate from lots of other sites around there that comment on research and MS research is that we do this. This is, you know, I think this is really unique to what we do, is that we get to have these conversations, that we have these discussions, because we are, you know, a big community, and it's about having conversations. The fact that what we do is a two-way street, where I get to learn from you guys, and you hopefully get to learn from me. You know, that we can come on here and talk for, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours about MS research. I think that's really special. I think that is something that no one else is really doing. And that's a lot to do with your engagement. The fact that you guys, for whatever reason, want to come on here of an evening and listen to me drone on for this length of time. But not only come on and listen, but come on and, you know, share your thoughts, ask your questions, you know, share your experiences. That's amazing. And it's, you know, it is hugely appreciated. It's hugely appreciated by me. It's hugely appreciated by Eric. And it's hugely appreciated by everyone else in the community as well. You know, I think everyone should realize that, you know, comments that you make on here, whether or not someone replies to it, and we've seen examples tonight already where, you know, there's conversations directed towards me, and then there's conversations directed towards other people who have had comments, but whether or not, you know, they say it, there's lots of other people in here watching it now, or who will watch it back later, who get a lot from reading your comments. You know, they may not ask the questions, but they're probably thinking them as well. And so the fact that people come in here and ask them means that other people are getting the answers to their questions as well. The fact that you come on and share your experiences means that other people in our community can see that and they don't feel isolated. They understand that there are other people out there who are going through very similar things to them, and that's powerful. It's hugely powerful. And I will never undersell the importance of that, regardless of how long MStranslate goes for, how many different things that we talk about. That is the important part of it, is that we are a community and we are working to improve the lives of people living with MS together. That's me, that's Eric, that's all of the researchers that interact with us, and it's hugely our community. I will continue to stress that every day in every conversation that we have. So when I say thank you, trust me, I mean it completely. So thank you again. And thank you for all your kind words there. Sorry, I'm just seeing Kathy question about NMO. If you send me the paper, I can have a look. I haven't seen it, but send it through and I'll have a look and I can reply and give you my thoughts on that. So with that, that's probably a pretty good place to finish it. If anyone has any last comments or questions, ask now. If not, I'll leave it a couple of minutes just to see if anyone has any, but once that ticks over to an hour 40, we'll call it a night so that everyone can get some rest. But I hope everyone's enjoyed the chat tonight. Participation's been great. Exciting news, which we mentioned right at the start, is that MStranslate will be attending ECTRIMS again this year, so we'll be able to provide first-hand information live from Stockholm. Which is exciting for us, exciting for you guys. Have a look through the ECTRIMS program. It's been released. Tell us topics that you want to hear about, and we'll make sure that we do as much as we can to provide that content. And there'll be lots of exciting things happening around that meeting as well that we hope to be able to bring you in terms of other conversations that we have while over there. So with that being said, no more questions coming through. Still lots of people watching. Thank you everyone that's watched tonight. If you are watching this back later, obviously this will be published to the page. Feel free to drop your questions. We get notifications to let us know that there's new questions there. I'll respond by writing a comment underneath your question. But otherwise, again, we'll look to do one of these soon, I'm sure. I'll do one of these again before head off to Europe, if not from Europe. But thank you. Enjoy your evenings. And I really look forward to talking again soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Bye.